I paid my sister's bills for years. The one time I said no, she called me selfish. So I cut her off completely. I called it helping. For 4 years it had been nothing more heroic than a recurring bill payment in my online banking app. Autopay set up so my sister, Jessica, would never have to think about due dates, overdrafts, or the tiny panic that reaches your throat when a collection agency calls. It started stupidly as sisterly charity. It ended up being the reason I learned how to say no, how to keep my dignity, and later, how to build the life that made them all look twice. This is my story, how paying someone else's life for years taught me how to buy my own. When I was a kid, my parents taught me 2 things about money and family. Money is practical, you save, you plan, you pay your own way, and family is automatic, you help without thinking. They said the second as if it were the definition of love. But families are mosaics of choices and excuses, and sometimes the help becomes an invisible leash. I live in a 1-bedroom flat on the edge of Philly, not fancy, not tiny enough to be charming, just honest. I work in corporate finance. I like order. Spreadsheets make me calm. Jessica liked the look of nice things. She liked the sound of her own laugh when it bounced off a marble lobby. I used to resent that difference, until I stopped resenting it and started paying for it. It began when she lost a contract, then another. She called one evening, voice tight. "I'll catch up next month, Em. I promise. Could you maybe front this?" I said yes. Then again. And again. Once, I covered an $8,000 shortfall to stop a garnishment. Once, I paid for a car repair so her BMW wouldn't sit at the curb. I didn't put it on a sentimental altar. I rationalized, family helps each other. Besides, I made good money. $185 and K a year, my mom would say with that small pride reserved for the steady one. I believed I could afford the generosity. I kept records like any responsible person would, PDFs, emails, confirmations. I'm an auditor by temperament, and when you do something for years, you document it. Not to keep score, that was the lie I told myself, but because I like things that can be proven. The spreadsheet became a private shrine, dates, amounts, purpose notes. House payments labeled loan temp, auto insurance, credit card minimums. By the end of year 2, it didn't feel temporary anymore. By the end of year 4, the bottom row read $58,200. It is one thing to be generous. It is another to be invisible while you are burned out. The Thanksgiving it all broke open started ordinary. I baked a pumpkin pie, bought a modest bouquet for my mother's table, and rehearsed gentle conversation in case someone asked why my rent was prioritized over helping family. The house smelled like sage and turkey, and that curated kind of holiday belonging my parents like to produce. Mom complimented my pie. Dad clapped me on the shoulder and said the usual, "We're proud of you, Em." I accepted the backhanded comfort and sat down. Jessica arrived late, glamorous, coiffed, Gucci coat hugging her shoulders like a flag. I don't hate nice things. I just hate the performance of them when they are paid for by someone else. She took her place at the table and I watched the family orbit her. Adoration, excuses, the soft air that made me a background character again. Conversation skated like polite skates across the ice until Sophia, a cousin who occasionally asked me for real advice about student loans, mentioned her debt. I offered a helpful tip and Jessica, with that perfect smile, cut it off. "Why don't you ask Emily? She's the numbers person." The room turned like a stage spotlight. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then Jessica, with the practiced inflection of someone who has supervised narratives for years, said, "Seriously, Em, if you're short, I can help." Short. I had never asked her for a single dollar in my life. Let me be clear, I buy my own shoes. I pay my own utilities. I save for the future. I had never asked her to fund any portion of my life. But the look on her face said she'd rehearsed this. It was a version of the ancient family trick, rewrite the ledger so you can be the injured party. I left dinner early, hands in my coat pockets, heart pounding in an odd way, not the urgent panic I'd once had when the bank called, but the cold, clear energy that comes when you realize the script you've been handed is fake. I sat in my car in the driveway and opened the banking app. There it was, 5 recurring payments to names I half recognized, dates, confirmations. Autopay. Each month, like a metronome, money flowed out. I'd been disciplined. I'd been generous. I'd been dug into. I went home and opened my spreadsheet file. The numbers became a landscape, rows like contour lines. I did what I had to do. I canceled every single recurring payment. Confirmation emails pinged my inbox like a small rebel army being mustered. I felt light in a way I haven't in years. That night I slept properly for the first time in, God help me, 4 years. The hurricane came fast. Jessica called. Furious, theatrically wounded. She went from pleading to rage in about 30 seconds. She stood in the lobby of my office building facing me with mascara tracking down her cheeks. How could you do this? She said, as if I'd committed a crime against nature. My coworkers watched. The security guard glanced. I kept my voice even. I showed her the spreadsheet. Evidence has this funny effect on dramatic people. It reveals the choreography they rely on. She snarled, "You're heartless." She left in a hiss of stiletto and entitlement. My mother phoned next, voice thin with disappointed performance. "Emily, Jessica is devastated. You can't just cut her off when she needs help." My father's voice followed, "We raised you to help family." I said plainly, "I did help for 4 years. $58,200 I have records, I'm at my limit." I heard silence, the kind that lets you know you've disturbed a faraway machinery where they expected you to be the part that always turns. They called me selfish. They accused me of cruelty. I had been the dependable one for so long they couldn't imagine me being anything else. A strange thing happened after Thanksgiving I didn't expect. People started checking facts. Lauren, an old college friend, called and her voice was quiet with shock. "Holy crap, Em, I didn't know." David, Jessica's husband, called from his car raw with confession. "She hid it. I didn't realize we're in trouble." Cousins texted support. The family group chat split into factions. Team Emily formed privately. No one had seen the long ledger except me. The narrative didn't flip overnight. People are messy and slow. But once truth leaks into a system of stories, the pressure cracks the convenient fiction. Some relatives offered sympathy. Many were defensive. A few sided with Jessica immediately because the golden child story was comfortable. My phone filled with messages asking me to reconsider. I ignored most of them. I answered the ones that mattered. Jessica's calls became more desperate, then manipulative. "You'll regret this," she said once, venom thin enough to be almost polite. She posted a sorrowful, heartbroken message in the family chat, and loved ones flocked to comfort her. I watched from the outside, as the statistical truth I'd compiled turned into rumors inside the family engine. They rearranged facts to protect their preferred roles. That's what families do, they remodel reality to minimize discomfort. I paused before acting next. My anger had cooled into strategy. I wanted a boundary, and I wanted consequences that meant something. I also knew I owed myself recovery. I had been living beneath my means to bankroll someone else's persona. The $950 a month that had been subsidizing her life was my savings invisible. It was the down payment I could have had on a condo if not for 4 years of autopay. I did 3 things in the months that followed. First, I got better at saying no, and I practiced it publicly. When my mother called for a family talk, I declined politely. When Dad tried to guilt me about loyalty, I read him a portion of the spreadsheet and then hung up. The simple act of refusing rescinded a kind of consent. People resent boundaries because they were built to rely on you acting without them. Second, I took legal and financial precautions. I had never wanted to weaponize the law against my own family. I'm not cruel. But I also wasn't naive. I consulted an attorney friend and discussed whether any of the transfers could be treated as loans versus gifts. I tightened my account settings, changed passwords, and learned about joint account vulnerabilities. Knowledge felt like armor. Third, I turned the money I'd been throwing into someone else's life back into my life. The first big purchase was practical, a proper desk for my home office and a chair that didn't make my back cry. Then I set a small emergency fund, invested a slice, and opened a high-yield savings account. The thing about reclaiming autonomy is that it often involves boring actions. You reallocate, you plan, you buy better chairs. Those small choices compound. With every confirmation email I kept, the dust of 4 wasted years fell away, and I could see the map of a life I actually wanted. Of course, there were consequences. Jessica reacted with public self-pity, then accusations, then the occasional threat. She tried the mental health card once in a family chat, a manipulative attempt to frame the incident as me being cruel to someone fragile. I clipped a calm response and noted that compassion doesn't mean being a perpetual bank. Empathy doesn't require you to be a credit card. Some relatives folded, a few stopped talking to me. That hurt, but it was also a relief. If someone only valued me for money, losing them was trimming dead weight. And then something that surprised me happened. Other people started to show up. A neighbor at work, a woman, Lauren, who had been quietly supportive for years, brought me sandwiches and an envelope with a note. You are not alone. A client I'd helped years ago recommended me when her company needed a contract analyst freelance. It started small, a weekend project here, a part-time consulting job there. The extra income scaled. The time I'd freed by not paying other people's bills translated into late evenings on my own small ventures. I enrolled in a night class for financial modeling simply because I wanted to, not because anyone else told me to be more useful. That class introduced me to Jake, a founder who needed someone to clean up sloppy books at his seed stage company. I agreed to a part-time contract. He became my first real ally in business, then a friend. The work was satisfying, messy, real, full of impact. I started to taste an identity that wasn't defined by familial obligations. 2 years after Thanksgiving, my life looked different in ways both small and enormous. I had $35 and K in liquid savings. I had a side consulting business that slowly ate up spare evenings, until one day it demanded a full weekday. I moved from my one-bedroom to a small but sunlit 2-bedroom condo with an office window that faced trees. I paid cash for some bits, financed the rest prudently. The sense of safety felt revolutionary. Jessica. She weathered storms. Sometimes she called when things were bad, the car repossessed, the credit calls, the husband's job loss. Each call pulled at an old reflex inside me that wanted to fix things. But the spreadsheet was always there, like a rational guardian angel. It kept me honest about patterns. One afternoon, 3 years after that dinner, Jessica showed up at my door with a courier box and a letter. She looked thin in a way money cannot fake. I needed to return something, she said, voice muffled. She handed me a stack of envelopes, old receipts, postcards, and a note. The note was messy, I'm sorry. Not enough ever. But within it was something else, a willingness to acknowledge the pattern. She admitted the months of lies, and the armor of performance she built to hide how scared she was of not being enough. Forgiveness isn't a switch. I didn't hug her. We talked, measured, careful. She volunteered to set up a repayment plan. I recommended counseling. She started a job cleaning office buildings at night, and going to a community college during the day to study hospitality. It wasn't a triumphant redemption arc, but it was movement, slow, earnest. I met her halfway, not by bailing her out, but by signing a formal documented agreement covering certain debts she agreed to repay. There were conditions. Accountability matters more than charity. The family shifted over time, too. Some relationships remained tense. Mom and Dad had a hard time admitting they'd accepted a narrative that cost me years. But little things changed. At one family barbecue, I heard my father mention, unprompted, we maybe should have noticed. The words were small but a crack in the wall. Granny called me one evening and said simply, you were brave. I'd never heard her say anything like that. It warmed me more than any wealth. The real triumph wasn't the money. It was the way cutting myself off forced me to examine the parts of my life I'd been giving away. I reclaimed quiet joy, weekends where I did nothing but read or go to the farmer's market. I found a group of friends who held me, not because I was funding their lifestyles, but because we liked each other. I found work that was meaningful and clients that valued me professionally. I found self-respect, which had the odd effect of making other people treat me better. People seem to calibrate their demands when your internal compass is steadier. There's a practical addendum I learned, and it matters for anyone in a similar trap. If you are giving money to family, document the terms. Decide what is a gift and what is a loan. Preserve records. Set an end date. Consider putting transfers on a time-limited basis with scheduled reviews. People change when structure is introduced. I learned this after the fact. I wish someone had told me earlier. Generosity without boundaries is nothing more than burnt-out kindness. People ask if I regret it, the cut, the rift, the cold exchanges that followed. I do not. I regret the years of depletion, and the nights where I lay awake wondering if being good meant eroding myself. But I don't regret that I chose myself. There's nothing noble about being a perpetual safety net for someone who doesn't learn to stand. Sometimes Jessica and I go for coffee. It's awkward. It's sometimes tearful. It is sometimes normal. We don't live the same lives. She is rebuilding. I am building too, not only assets, but habits and boundaries and the little scaffolding that holds a decent life together. There was one moment, about 5 years after I stopped the autopay, when I understood how far I'd come. I was at a small launch party for a community program that my consulting work supported. We'd helped a local nonprofit modernize their donor platform, and it worked. I stood in a room full of people who had no idea of my family history, and I felt full. A woman I didn't know approached me with a quiet smile. "You organized the analytics for the campaign, right? That spreadsheet you made saved us," she said. I smiled. "Yes," I said. "I did." She said, "Well, thank you for choosing to do it." I realized then that choosing myself had made room for me to be useful, not indebted. My generosity was now a chosen tool, not an obligation. I tell this to strangers sometimes when the topic comes up. The story is rarely black and white. Families are complicated. People you love can hurt you. The difficult act is parsing the two, loving someone and refusing to be the well they draw from until you dry up. It isn't cruelty to say no. Sometimes it is the most honest form of love, for yourself, and eventually for the person across from you when they are ready to change. If you gave me a spreadsheet of the old life versus the new, the net numbers would tell a pleasant truth. I banked $58,200 of my life and turned it into more than money. I turned it into the practice of saying no. I turned it into time. I turned it into a small business. I turned it into a life where people show up for me because they want to, not because they need my account to stay solvent. That, as it turned out, was the real victory.